What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Wicked Prepping YouTube channel. What you're about to see is highlights from our past stream. If you'd like to see the whole stream, you can click the link in the description box below, which will take you to an unlisted video showing the whole podcast. We stream usually 3 times a week on Twitch. If you would like to follow us, join the conversation, smash that like button here on YouTube, follow us on Twitch, and let's start talking.
All teams ready?
You will be simulated. Resistance is futile.
So if we look at China's economic so-called recovery from a big business manufacturing point of view, they've recovered about 90% of their output in about 6 months. It took them 6 months to get to 90%. However, their consumer spending's down 50%, their hotels are down 50%, their air travel's down 75%. Now, the Chinese economy is manufacturing centric, so therefore they're not as impacted by it. They're far less consumer demand driven than we are. If we have these same type of numbers, our economic output's not going to be at 90%. It's going to be way, way lower than that. You got to ask, was the economic collapse driven by the lockdowns? It's another interesting question. And you can look at Sweden and Denmark like we did. Denmark had government mandated lockdowns. Sweden didn't. Consumer spending dropped 29% in Denmark. It dropped 25% in Sweden. Sweden witnessed a 70% drop in restaurant traffic. So it wasn't that the government locked things down. The people will ultimately mitigate the risk themselves. The demand will dry up and it's going to happen naturally. So it really didn't matter whether you had the lockdowns, you didn't have them. You're still going to have tremendous damage to your economy. I'm not even going to go through all those, but so I wanted to start off with the unemployment data. Now, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is for April. The May numbers will come out on around June 8th. So this is kind of looking back a little bit, but it gives us a starting point. So in April, the unemployment rate increased 10.3% to 14.7%. This is the highest rate and the largest over-the-month increase in the history of the series, going back to January 1948. And really, you have to go back to the Great Depression to even come close to those initial numbers. And it wasn't quite as rapid even during the Great Depression. In April, we had 23 million unemployed Americans. So that's kind of the starting point. And they noted back in April that the temporary layoffs were 18.1 million and the permanent losses or terminations were about 2 million. So if we take the number that all the economists are saying, which I agree with, is about 40%, they say 42% of temporary layoffs will become permanent. That means 7.6 million out of the 18.1 plus 2 million of the permanent. That gives you 9.6 million permanent job losses in the month of April. And again, that doesn't include all of May's losses, which will conservatively be in the 9 to 10 million range, but could go a little bit higher. That is an enormous amount of job losses. That's not something you just bounce back from quickly. That's crazy, never happened before numbers that you're just not gonna, people think they're going right back to work and it's not gonna happen. 40% of the people aren't even gonna ever go back to work. Their jobs are gonna dissolve and they're not gonna be there. But even those that do, it's going to take a very long time to get that process going, and it'll depend upon consumer demand to get there. We did get the numbers this week for initial jobless claims last week, and Fortune put the numbers out, and I also have the report, but over 40 million Americans have now filed for unemployment during the pandemic with a real jobless rate of over 23.9%. That's it. 1/4 of the job force is unemployed. That's insane. More than 2.1 million Americans filed their initial claim last week, which brings the total since mid-March to 40.8 million unemployed Americans. And that's an additional, just last week, of 2.1 million Americans. And you can see what that looks like. This was, excuse me, this was our normal average weekly job loss. We range typically right around 200,000, plus or minus 20. We'll go anywhere from 180 to 220 going across. And then you can see where we started going in. And then you can see, yes, the layoffs and the furloughs, they have decreased, but they're still occurring. I mean, they're still ongoing.
That's kind of an optical illusion because they're only decreasing because the number of available people to furlough and fire have drastically decreased.
Yes.
So it's kind of like it's not a real representation
right.
of the current state of affairs.
Yeah, you've got less people to lay up, but yet we're still laying off or furloughing 2 million Americans last week.
Right.
We're open now in most states trying to re-gear things for, anywhere from 14 to 21 plus days. If we're going to have this quick bounce back and you're saying people are going to go back to work, that's clearly not happening. Like 2 million people lost their jobs last week, not back to work, which is insane. And it's interesting to note that the most jobless claims during last week were from California, New York, and Georgia. And they point out that the surge in Georgia unemployment claims highlights that even states that are easing their business closures, which Georgia was among the first to do so, are still in economic trouble. They're getting worse, not better. We're not seeing this improving jobscape and economy. And I just picked some states here just to kind of look at from last week and the week before it. So blue is last week, and then the prior week is in orange. And I've got Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia to make it easy for you to read. I tried to pick some that were early openers. And then I've also got a couple other in there, but you can kind of see Florida and Georgia, they came down some, but they're still extreme. And everybody else is pretty much the same. I mean, they're not getting better. They're still laying off the same number of people week over week, which is very concerning. And it points out that this is demand driven and the demand is not there. So the government can say, hey, you can open up and go back to work. A, the demand's not there to bring people back. And B, businesses are going to be very slow to rehire and bring people back because they're going to be under tremendous pressure with their margins. They've got to start producing profits and earnings. And so the easiest way to do that is work the people you have more and not bring all that back in. So it's going to be a very slow recovery. And the reason why you have a consumer demand, we looked at this a couple streams ago when we looked at the survey information just in general. This was consumer likelihood to, once restrictions were lifted, to return to pre-COVID activities once they're lifted. And you can kind of look, we've got eat at restaurant, 44%, go to a bar, 21%, attend large sporting events, 20%, go to a gym, 29%, stay in a hotel, 30%, go to a movie, 24%, go to a barber or salon, 51%, attend church, 46%, which is kind of interesting because that's right in line with kind of what you had where there's a split between, opening those churches and not opening them. Travel on a plane was 29%, and send your child to school was 45%, which that's important because in order for people to get back into the job force and be able to go back to work, they've got to be able to deal with childcare and being able to send their kids back to school. And people just aren't comfortable with that right now. And you can, just look across the board, other than one right at 50%, everything else less than half the people are going to be very slow to go back and do things. Most people, the majority of Americans, get that we don't have effective treatments, we don't have a vaccine, we don't have a solution, and they understand they don't really want to get this. And I'll bring up another point when we get back to sort of what you were talking about, but I just kind of want to sum it up. We're being sold a lie. And that was that these non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPIs as they call them, which were social distancing, lockdowns, restrictions, things like these by the government, were destroying our economy. That's a lie. The pandemic, which is a viral threat, is damaging our economy. Reduced demand is going to happen regardless of whether the government mandates NPIs. Because if they don't, consumers are going to self-mitigate that. People are going to say, I feel safe, I don't feel safe. They're going to take, for the most part, the same steps, the majority of people, and you're not going to have the same demand. Failure to mitigate the viral threat, you're only prolonging the economic damage and increasing the human cost. You're not speeding anything up by going, it has to run its course. And then you hear a lot about the mental health side. The mental health would be impacted by the actual crisis, the viral threat, and everything going on, regardless of the MPIs. Like, people, very, very small percentage of people would be doing acts that are harmful to themselves strictly because of lockdowns. They're people that already have mental issues and things, and so when anytime you put any stress or crisis on them, it escalates that. And
Yeah.
if they lost their
Anxieties
job
and
because
manic people.
yeah, I mean, if you lost your job just because there's no demand, you could end up committing suicide or something. It's not to downplay it, it's just saying, to argue that is directly related and because of lockdowns and restrictions is not being intellectually honest, because a lot of that would have happened anyway, just because the world's in chaos and people with mental health issues don't deal well with chaos.
Right.
So basically it comes down to, and this is kind of when we get back into your topic that you were talking about, we basically have two choices. We can either fight this thing with aggressive mitigation, or we can take the herd immunity strategy. Now, both of those are valid strategies. I would argue, and I'll show in a minute why I don't think the herd immunity strategy is a good one, is the right choice to make, but you basically have those two choices. It's one or the other. You don't want to be in no man's land where you're in between these two, because it's going to kind of turn into a viral Vietnam. It's a no man's land. It's not a valid strategy or an effective choice. It's like going to war. It's all or nothing. You're either going or you don't, but you can't kind of go to war or go to war 20%. I mean, you're either going to fight it or you're not. But if you get caught in that middle, which is where we are right now, where we're split as a people and we're kind of, it's all over the place. Some people are doing this, some people are doing that. That's the worst case scenario, because it's totally ineffective and it's just going to make the thing a lot worse. Now, I would argue that a herd immunity strategy won't work because it's going to require a very high cost in human lives. That's not going to be acceptable for most people. And in terms of that cost, it's not just deaths, but it's permanent damage. It's, being in intensive care. And it's going to be a lot of deaths if we try to go that route and we just say, the heck with it. That's not going to be acceptable for most Americans. Like, the majority of Americans are not going to be good with that. That's easy to say when it's not impacting you or somebody or a loved one. When it starts to get closer to home, you're not going to be okay with just saying, well, the heck with Aunt Sue or, my spouse or whatever. Not going to work. Two, we don't even know if immunity exists for COVID-19. And you kind of brought that up, where there are people that aren't testing for any antibodies. So it could all be
less than 2% of people tested in these massive tests of 3,000, 4,000 recovered people develop antibodies.
Yeah. So, we don't know if you even get immunity, if what we're finding is enough. We have absolutely no idea, even if they do have some immunity, how long that'll last. So we could say we're going for herd immunity and we're going all in on this. That may never happen. It could continue to just go on and on. You have somebody that got it in the spring wave. Well, what happens when the second wave comes in the fall and they get it again? Because they didn't have immunity to it. It's just going to keep
to a point where their immunity was invalid.
It's just going to keep going. You're going to get it again. And what happens, and we've kind of seen this, when you get it the second time, maybe you were fine the first time. The second time, it could be a lot worse. And that's when I think we may see that kind of W-shaped curve come in that we saw kind of in the Spanish flu, where the middle-aged people really got hit with a high spike in fatality. Because that second wave, if that's what happens and you get that, we could see that spike where you have a lot of deaths in an area of age that we weren't seeing it right now. Now, it may not happen. We don't know. But the point is, we have no clue. No clue if we have immunity. Well, you can't shoot for herd immunity if you don't know you can get immunity.
I love how the science right now, the main leading science, I think this came from your group of people that are working on the vaccine. What was that group called? We did a stream about them where the pump and dump.
Oh man. Moderna.
Okay, so they released a study that showed that like 34 corona or COVID infected chimps all recovered and they had 100% immunity. or antibodies developed after they recovered. But here's the deal: chimps are immune to HIV, so we're not the same, clearly.
Yeah.
Because if we get HIV, the way it mutates in our DNA, we get fucked,
Yeah.
right? If we get coronavirus, the way it mutates in our DNA, pretty much we're fucked.
Yeah.
Right.
There's
So sitting there and saying that, oh well, chimps develop antibodies, so it's promising. That's not even close. They have antibodies. They're immune to HIV. You know what I mean? Like, it's not. You can't sit there and make those connections anymore.
yeah.
And it's just crazy that you have these leaders in science that are doing that. I mean, they say, well, we're 65% genetically identical to chimps. We're 55% genetically identical to a damn banana. Do you know that? So it doesn't make it, the percentages they're crap.
Yeah, because
show.
you're dealing with huge numbers when it comes to DNA. Like 0.1% is a huge difference. So
Right.
yeah, it's
And that's the difference between Down syndrome and normal operations right there. So
yeah. Yeah. And they did a big UK study. They were working on a vaccine. They said the same thing about the chimps that they were doing or whatever. And I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but they all had antibodies or something that were generated. But what they didn't tell everybody was that every single one of those chimps still got COVID-19. Even
like
though
when they were reinfected, or
no,
that's the real question.
They gave them the
me.
vaccine. They did develop some level of antibodies, but every single chimp still developed COVID-19 when they were given the active virus.
Yeah, you see,
So
that's what I'd be interested in. If they can test chimps to the point where they can say, we injected them with COVID-19, we saw that they recovered, they all developed antibodies. What happens if you give it to them again? What happens if you go out and get a mutated strand of the virus and then give it to them again?
Well, they didn't. Yeah, and they didn't even need to give it to him again. They gave it to him the first step, but they didn't tell anybody that. They just put out, every chimp got antibodies. Well, that's great, but they weren't neutralizing antibodies, so they all got COVID-19, and that came out after the fact. But that gets back to the whole thing that, you got two things going on with the vaccine work. One, it's all about money, and two, it's about selling hope to the markets.
Right, so your shares go up, so you get more money.
Yeah, well, and just trying to keep the market propped up and going. So it's like they know they're not going to have a vaccine by the end of the year. They know this, but they're going to keep saying they are to kick the can down the road, to keep people thinking. And then they're like, well, when we get to December and we don't have it, we'll figure out a story then. And then it'll be, another month we're going to get it. They're just giving people false hope to keep things propped up and going. And I get it, but I'm a believer, and don't give me bullshit. I'd rather have the truth than you make me feel good about something, and lead me on. That's just, I understand why they're doing it, because they've got to give some hope to people. But the other half of it is it's all about money, and they want their stock to go up, but and whatnot. The third point on why herd immunity won't work is that it would require 100% participation.
Right.
All individuals, all businesses, the government, everybody would have to say, we're going back exactly to what we were doing before. We're going to accept the risk, and we're going back. That's never going to happen, because 2/3 of the country know that's bullcrap, and they're not going to take that risk. So it's just not realistic. So you've got to stay out of that middle ground. I mean, we've got to go one way or the other. We can't go for herd immunity. So we really have to use, as best we can, mitigating measures to try to buy us time, to try to limit the damage as much as we can until we get to a point that we can deal with the virus. Because those are the only two options. We don't want to live in the middle, because the economy is going to get screwed anyway. We're going to lose more people. I mean, you just don't want to do it. It's like being in Vietnam, and you say, we're going to take this hill, and it costs you, 200 deaths of soldiers, and then the next day you're like, you know what, the rules of engagement changed, we're going to give the hill back,
right? And
you just lost 200 people for nothing, and that's what happened, because there was no cohesive, everything changed every day, it was political, it was all over the place. That's not an effective strategy to win a war.
Right.
They weren't playing to win, and right now we're not playing to win, I guess, is what I'm kind of getting at. And
here's what I want to get out, if you're okay with me taking over for just a second.
Yeah.
While I have a thought on the tip of my tongue. I think it's just interesting that when we had 120 deaths in the country, 120, that was basically the melting point for everything to start shutting down. That's when people, or at least like local governments, started enforcing shutdowns. And that's when there was the federal travel bans against China and some other countries and stuff like that. And that's when the schools were really shut down across the nation. A lot of governments, local governments said, "No, we're not gonna do schools anymore." At 120 deaths, right? Well, now in the United States alone, we are at well over 100,000, and they're talking about opening schools in July. Summer schools in Georgia, they're opening schools in June. They're having summer school. They're
I
having
know.
summer camps, and I get that kids aren't the main threat here, but staff is. Kids are
They bring
transmissible.
it home.
They bring it home. They spread it. They keep the virus alive. They keep mutations growing strong. It's only a matter of time before it mutates into kids. I mean, there's a reason why there's a cat sticking her paw under my door right now. There's a reason why, with the regular flu, the main targets are always younger kids and older people. It's because they have a compromised immune system. But I mean, there's strands of the flu that come out all the time that just wreck younger people, and that's a yearly thing. And we have vaccines and treatments and Tamiflu and a really thoughtful understanding of how the flu attacks the body and how to treat it, and people are still dying the flu in all age groups. And yeah, it has this target age groups that it attacks, but we always like to, people always like to compare this virus to the flu for whatever reason. So I just don't understand why at 120 deaths, this was such a massive pandemic that we had to shut everything down. And now because there's so much civil unrest, basically, and people are yelling about it, we're at an actual threat level of well over 100,000, and we're only 3 months into the pandemic. And they said 100,000 was going to be by September. That's what they estimated, was 100,000 by September. They have 3 months to go. We could see 200, 250,000 if we get hit by the second wave, and before
it's
September.
Going to be high.
We could see 200,000 to 300,000. You're talking, that's a massive amount of people. Nothing else in this country kills that many people. You can't compare it to car deaths at that point. You can't compare it to heart failure or drug overdose or gun violence. Nothing else comes close to that number at that point. And people now are acting like it's over. People now are, schools are reopening, restaurants are reopening, everything's going back to business, and that's just going to keep the number going up. Because, I mean, think about it from a rational standpoint. We had 100,000 with strict lockdowns. We had 100,000 with social distancing measures in place and face mask laws and all this other crap. When we get back to opening shit back up, and now that, it's worse than it ever was, hospitalizations are higher than ever across the country, because they are. Not in hotspot areas. In hotspot areas, they might be down because those people that had the hotspot initial outbreaks have either recovered or died. But hospitalizations are up.
Yeah, but even in those hot spots, again, they're just coming off of a wave, off of a peak. It will be back.
But not everyone's even peaked yet, is what I'm saying.
No, I know.
Some places are just now riding into their peak.
Right, but even the places like New York that have peaked, it's not over.
Right.
They're just,
and everyone's acting like it is, though.
Right. It's just a natural, you're going to have peaks and valleys. That's the way nature works, like we saw with the flu.
Yeah.
So you're right. Even those are going to come back, but all the other areas are building. We haven't reached the peak. So the first peak.
I just don't get the mentality behind reopening right now. I understand wanting to give the choice back to the people and limit government's involvement. But what people really need to understand is I don't believe the government's good at doing anything. Let me just say that. But there is a massive amount of constant equations that go into these decisions by experts that are advising the government and advising the governor's boards and local leaders' boards and even the president. And these people are experts at pro-con equations. Life to death ratio and the benefit of the economy over life and everything else like that. And all of the experts are coming back with the same conclusion over and over again, that it is not worth it to go back. It's not worth it to reopen. It's not worth it to do all this and that. And these are experts that are running these equations, these algorithms of the life to death ratio, of the infection ratio, of everything else like that, versus saving the economy.
And they're realizing that you're not saving the economy. They're realizing the jobs they're not coming back anyway.
Yeah.
So why are we risking something for nothing?
The cost benefit ratio of life and death over the economy is not even close to balanced right now. And we have people that aren't experts. We have people that are uneducated, but they're loud. and they're making it a point to be heard. And so they're causing a lot of pressure in places where really they're going to end up doing more harm than good. And I'm at this point, into this pandemic, I'm kind of at the cynical point where I'm like, let them dig their own graves. They're making their own beds. They're gonna have to sleep in it. But the hard part is this isn't something that's just going to affect those people. If those people all go out and they do go back into society, they do get sick and they do spread it around, everyone around me is still going to suffer. So it's not like it's not like with gun violence. It's not like with gang violence. It's not like with drug overdosing where it's self-inflicted and isolated to one or two events. This is massive. This is viral. There's a reason it's called a virus. It infects everything that it can. So it's a different, you have to have a different mindset going into this problem when you're looking for a solution. And people think that there's no gray area. They think that it's either government's trying to lock us all down and take control of us, or government's trying to help us. There's no like, well, maybe we're all just trying to mitigate this together and learn going forward, and we're being patient and letting different techniques, because what needs to happen is you need to come up with a plan, and you have to let it run its course for some time to see if it's effective. You can't keep changing your plan on a weekly basis and expect to see results. I mean, it's just like with working out or with budgeting or with growing a channel or growing a new business. You can't just change your business plan every week. You can't change your plan all the time and expect to see good results. You have to come up with a plan, apply the plan, see the results, and then modify it from there. But because of all this unrest and because of trying to make everybody happy, we haven't been able to do that since this started. And that's the frustrating part, is we don't know what works. And the reason we don't know what works is because when we try something,
we're all over
it gets
the place.
shut down.
Yep.
And everyone's trying different things at the same time. You can't troubleshoot a problem like that. You can't troubleshoot a problem by trying 10 different things at the same time. You need to do it one step at a time. Replace one thing, take away one thing, and then watch the result, wait for the result, run a test, look at the stats. But you have all these different places trying a million different things all at the same time in different ways, and we get no real answers on anything. Yeah. It's frustrating.
And, and I know we're kind of both at the point, we've made it clear lately on the streams that, look, we understand we're reopening and we're moving away from restrictions. We get it. We're not going back. We understand that. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we as a people going to voluntarily do the things we need to do to deal with the virus and reduce those risks? So here's an example of what I'm trying to get at. We have all these people who are Mr. and Mrs. Independent, and I'm not wearing a mask, and I don't care about social distancing or whatever, and I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. And the problem with that is that when we looked at it, we need everybody has to participate. Like, if you want to go back to work and you want to have the freedoms to plug back in and have the life that you were living, you can't do that alone. You need everybody else to come along with you to make that happen. So you need to be doing everything you can do to make everybody else around you as comfortable as possible with getting back to life. So to take a stance that, well, screw you, I'm not wearing a mask because I think it's stupid, is counterproductive. Because It doesn't matter whether you think it's stupid or not. It's not about you. Wear the damn mask to make everybody else more comfortable, because that's going to encourage them to feel comfortable to go out and start creating that consumer demand that we need to get people back to work. So it's really frustrating, because the very thing that they're arguing about and don't want to do is the very thing that's keeping them from getting what they want. And they have to keep in mind that there's a small percentage of Americans out there that they just want to plug right back into life. They want to go back to the rat race. They want to go back to competing with the Joneses and living beyond their means. That worked for them or whatnot. For the majority of Americans, they've been begging for decades for an opportunity to move further away from that, to get back to the things that are important to them. And this has provided a lot of Americans with an opportunity to step back for a little bit, take a breath, reconnect with family, neighbors, friends, to realize that, hey, I don't really need to go out every night of the week. I don't really need to go shopping and buy all this stuff. I'm actually more happy right now and reconnecting with people and not spending this money. You know, we've been programmed to do that, but you're starting to see people now beginning to kind of do the one thing they've wanted to do for so long, is to be able to step back and get back to what's important to them.
Yep.
So, A, they're not super motivated to go right back to what they want to do in the first place, but B, they have reasonable concerns about, why do I want to risk my health for something that I'm not even sure anymore is that important to me? So if you're going to overcome that, you need to be doing everything you can do to make them feel comfortable and encourage them to go back to that lifestyle, or you're never getting back yourself. So it makes no sense. You may hate a damn mask. You may hate social distancing. You may hate having to walk in a certain pattern through a store and only have 50% in a restaurant eating, and you got to wait a little bit longer. Who cares? You need to do those things, because what happens is these people that aren't real excited about getting out there, they'll go out, they'll kind of venture out a little bit, and then all of a sudden they've got people getting in their bubble, not wearing a mask, not doing this and that, and it pushes them right back to the home and makes them just say, you know what, I don't need this. You know,
Yep.
I'm happier, I'm saving money, I'm less stressed out. This is actually better. So they need to understand, they need to do those things, because it's going to, if they want to get back to what they want, it's going to take everybody feeling comfortable and getting back to it. You know, 90%'s not going to do it. You know, you need at least 95. But look, if you had a 5% shrink in GDP, you're starting to get into a recession area. You know, I mean, 10% down, you're in a pretty strong recession. You start talking about 20, 30% down, it's Great Depression time. So you need everybody re-engaging, and that demand has to go back to that same level, or it's not going to be the same.
Absolutely.
And I'm gonna tell you right now, it's never going to be the same. But if you're one of those people that thinks it will be, and that you just want everybody to go back and let's all go back to work and open
Half the
everything
people
up,
don't have anything to go back to.
Yeah, exactly. But if that's your mindset, you need to understand that you can't do it alone. It's going to take everybody. So you're helping yourself by making other people feel comfortable. Stop fighting masks. Stop fighting social distancing. Start acting responsible, because the more irresponsible you are, the more it keeps other people from participating and getting out there. And without them, you're never going back to normal. You know, you're just not.